sure we're all tested. Screens are up. All right, so good morning, everyone. We're going to get started with today's webinar. With everything that's going on in the world today, we thought this topic is going to be amazing for you. I'm Patty Dow. I'm the Member Services Specialist here at the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, and I'm hosting you this morning. As a society, we're continuing to progress towards an inclusive world, but we still have so much work to do. Cynthia and I were chatting briefly before we started, and there's just this constant evolution. So learning about beyond binary will help us create a more welcoming workplace that we can all be proud of. The chamber, my apologies, we recently added our pronouns to our signature. And just that small gesture can make a huge difference for those who are constantly having to remind people of their preferred pronouns and their preferred language. Thanks everyone who submitted your questions for our presenter. When we get to the Q&A, feel free to type other questions in the chat box. I will be monitoring the chat box and the Q&A box in behind the scenes. Our presenter and guest speaker today is Cynthia Sweeney. She and her pronouns. She's a diversity and inclusion beyond binary education consultant with Simply Good Form. We're very excited to have Cynthia with us this morning. Welcome, Cynthia. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much, Patty, for that introduction, and to the Chamber for inviting me to speak today. It's a great privilege, and I'm really excited to talk to you all about Beyond Binary. I'd like to also say a thank you to Sandra Thompson, who is moderating all the magic tech in the background. So greatly appreciated. I know sometimes using the tech in new platforms can be a little bit challenging. So we have everything running smoothly, but just bear with us. If there's a little hiccup, we'll get it going again really smooth. So off we go. Yes, my name is Cynthia Sweeney. I do use she, her pronouns, and I'm looking forward to talking to you for the next hour. First of all, I just would like to do a land acknowledgement. We are all in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, as uninvited guests. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship with Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqet people, first signed with the British Crown in 1725. And I just wanted to show you this map of what Mi'kma'ki looked like at the time of European contact, circa 1500. So we can kind of visualize this space and the spaces that the Mi'kma'ki people lived within. It was a really large and expansive area divided into 7 districts, and today divided by provincial borders and confined to smaller land areas. These communities at first glance just look like small rural communities within Canada. So I think it's really important that we all remember we are all treaty people, and we are responsible for interacting with people, with one another, with respect and dignity. So who is Simply Good Form Consultancy? We launched in 2019, and I'd like to start off with this quote from Maya Angelou, which is really the bones of where Simply Good Form evolved out of. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Our mission is simple. We look to empower people's ability for inspiring safe spaces and learning environments. We want to inspire confidence for language and communication that is open and respectful of the 2S LGBTQ+ communities. In order to do this, we need to look inside and reflect upon our own inner biases. We all have them. It's only normal. It's part of our self-defense mechanism and our survival instincts. And we want to strive to build cultural competency within our everyday communication, but as well, most importantly, in where we're working and the spaces where we're interacting with people, our coworkers, our clients. So do the best you can do until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. Another fabulous quote by Maya Angelou. And that's what what we strive to hope to deliver through Simply Good Form. We can present you with information, and what you do with that information is really your own journey. And we like to look at evolution as opposed to resolutions this time of year, and with new beginnings on January 1st. And if you look inside, perhaps at any point during this presentation, and you see that your moral compass or your values need some realigning, that's okay. And you don't need to share any of that with me, but we all need to know this ourselves. So as I mentioned, we launched in 2019. 2020 was set to be a growth year for us. And then, of course, COVID happened. I don't really need to say much more on that. It was a bit of a disaster for us, but we did, we hunkered down and spent March and April taking all of our in live person workshops and seminars to an online platform, which has been wonderful in being able to extend our reach and continue to do the inclusion work that we are doing here at Simply Good Form. Here's just a quick glimpse of our small team that exists right now. Isaac Cook came to us through PFLAG Canada. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Isaac uses he, him, and they, their pronouns, and has been an educator with us for since our inception, but a volunteer with PFLAG Halifax, and has done a lot of work within schools. And Kaylee Fox comes to us from Newfoundland. She was based here in Halifax, but returned home to her home province. And we work virtually with Kaylee, and it's been a wonderful experience working with her and her knowledge. And so we do a lot of virtual work. The bones of Simply Good Form is that I contract trans and non-binary people. We want to give voices to the community and a platform to be able to connect and reach out. As mentioned, I use she, her pronouns. I am cisgender, I am an ally. And so why am I standing up here talking about diversity and inclusion as a white, cisgender, straight woman? And if cisgender is a new term to you and you're wondering, wait a minute, I'm not sure what that means, I'll dive into that in a second as well. So a little bit about my background. I'm a writer and journalist by trade. And in 2017, we relaunched the chapter of PFLAG Halifax here in Nova Scotia. It had lied dormant for about 20 years. It's a national nonprofit that supports anyone wherever they are on their journey around sexual orientation and gender identity. And within PFLAG Halifax, we saw a really big demand, which was happening across Canada as well, for parents and caregivers of trans and non-binary children looking for support and navigational support. And so this became quite a large focus of the work and the volunteer nonprofit work we do with PFLAG Halifax. I'm also an ongoing board director with Pride Lunenburg, and I am the parent of 3 amazing kids. One of them is transgender. Our youngest child transitioned when they were in elementary school, and they were their child's very first openly trans student. And it's been a journey, to say the least, but it was a prime example, which I hope that when we talk a little bit more about this today, that it can translate into your workspaces, it can translate into every environment that we focus within. But when you come across a place that has policies on paper that say we can support you and we can keep you safe and we can create welcoming environments, and they don't translate into effective action, something really awful can happen. And it can really spiral somebody's ability to thrive and live authentically, but more importantly, to live safely. And so that is the heart of Simply Good Form, and why it evolved was through a way of wanting to navigate and wanting to help people understand what gender identity is. This is just some of the advocacy work that we have done as far as flag raisings, and we connect a lot with schools, national businesses, international businesses, and local. So let's dive in here. What is the problem? Excuse me. How do we as entrepreneurs, businesses, organizations create safe and welcoming spaces when we don't realize they're unsafe in the first place? How can we unlearn the binary and incorporate this into our daily lives? Well, first, we have to look at what actually is unsafe within our spaces and what we can be doing as leaders. and ask ourselves, why will unlearning the binary make safe spaces and positively impact my clients, my staff, my coworkers, both cisgender and gender diverse? The real question is, why should you care? Why does this matter to you? Why do you need to be involved and play an active role? So let's dive in and go beyond binary together. If we can take a quick moment, I'm going to ask you to pull out your phones. And what you can do is, if you have your phone, this is completely anonymous. Your name is not going to come up attached to this question. But what I'd like you to do is type in the number. You're going to text to the number 37607. So that's your phone number that you text to. And then to activate the poll, what you're going to do is you're going to text Cindy S in all caps 054. And once you do that, you should get, now let's see here, I'm just going to go into the actual poll here. You should get a little message that says you are now part of Poll Everywhere. And if you could just type into this space, and there's no right and there's no wrong answer. I don't want you to think too hard about it, but tell me what your gender identity is. And if you can type this in, again, I said it's fully anonymous and volunteer participation, but we could get an idea of the fabric of who is watching this webinar today. Okay, we've got one popping up, he, him. And as more people answer with the same particular question, you'll see that it'll get bigger. So we'll just take a few minutes with this. It can be tricky to get it going the first time. We're going to be doing a couple of these, so you can just keep the text on your phone. Okay, so there we go. We have a couple more here. He, him, woman, she, her, cisgender, female. So it's interesting because if I ask somebody this, face to face. And sometimes I can almost see people kind of stand back and think about, oh, wait a minute, like what are they asking me? And it's not uncommon for people to kind of get mixed up and say, oh, are they asking me my sexual orientation? Do they want my name? Do they want my pronouns? And so that's where we're going to try to talk a little bit more about pronouns and gender identity and getting comfortable with talking about who we are. So I'm going to just go back. Thank you for everyone that texted in. Oh, sorry, here we go. Okay. The great thing about gender identity is that we all have one. Not only trans and non-binary people have a gender identity. Every one of us does. And it's important that we reflect on this and that we know this. But when it comes to biology and gender and sexual orientation, it's complex. Biology is complex and it's not nearly as simple as two little boxes. But we've been walled up inside these boxes often since the day we were born, or sometimes even before we're born. For me, I'm an F, female. I've identified as she, her my entire life. I've never had to think about this. And because I've never had to second guess it and think it and somewhat take it for granted, I've been able to remain relatively neutral as to the idea of people not fitting into a binary box, binary, M for male, F for female. But there are upwards of 3% of the population who identify under the trans umbrella. And the trans umbrella, transgender is an umbrella term. Trans meaning someone whose sex is assigned at birth does not align with their gender identity. So under the umbrella, you could have somebody who identifies as gender fluid or gender non-binary or even agender. And I pose the question, how is it that they are to find space in a world of boxes that have been designed to exclude them? And so today I'd like us to look at the way we live and the way we see gender through a unique lens, and hopefully shake up some of those biases that have been ingrained in us ever since we were born, and we're aware acutely of what's going on in society around us and the messages that have been thrust at us. So your gender identity is one's innermost sense of self, as a man, as a woman, or as lying somewhere in between those two lines, or lying outside gender lines altogether. Unlike your sex as assigned at birth, your gender identity speaks to one's innermost sense of self and comes from the messages delivered from your brain. When we do training through Simply Good Form Consultancy and through our online workshops, we do dive a little bit more into definitions and terminology, and there's a lot. But what I think is most important is that we want to try to bridge the boundaries, and we want to break out of these boxes. And so getting caught up on one term or another can be diminutive. We would rather you be open, because language is always evolving, language is changing and growing, and how somebody identifies themselves is their own personal experience. And we should all be able to identify and share who we are in the world on our own personal level. But a couple of really important terms, which I just went through, was transgender or trans, and then cisgender. So we needed a word to be able to talk about somebody who is not transgender. And cis is the Latin prefix for on the same side as. So if you are cisgender, that simply means that your gender identity aligns with your sex as assigned at birth. And you might be saying, well, why do we need this term? Why do we have to label everything? Well, the transgender community has been deeply marginalized. They are probably one of the most marginalized groups of people that exist in the world. Being trans crosses all cultural lines, all socioeconomic backgrounds. It does not discriminate based on your culture or your color or how much money you make. And so having it been pathologized for so long and being treated as if there is something wrong with you, people would talk about transgender people, or I'm not trans, I'm normal. And that's not okay. And it's not a nice term, and it's not a nice way to refer. Being trans can be described as simply as a trait, like I have brown hair, you have blonde. I have blue eyes, you have green. And so for that reason, cisgender is a really important word, and knowing that you are cis, you don't have to necessarily share that with anyone, but knowing that yourself is important. And then another term that I do like to throw out, because I hear it so often still in the media, we're getting better, but it's in a lot of written policies that I've seen in companies, is the word transgendered. And they talk about the person who's transgendered, and it's a really harmful term and sounds pretty much as odd as if you say, oh, that person who's transgendered. It's like saying, oh, the person who's gayed or the person who's autismed. You wouldn't imply that something has happened to somebody. And it tends to put the person last and the action first. And so you would say the person who is trans, the person who is transgender. And so transgendered is definitely a word that you should not use and stay away from. But we do say that glad.org, that's GLAAD, is a wonderful reference for definitions if you're looking for set terms. But to give you a little bit more visualization, this is Sam Smith, a singer. And Sam said in an article of Vanity Fair in March 2019, I am not male or female. I think I float somewhere in between. So Sam uses they, them pronouns, and Sam's gender identity might be described as gender fluid, floating in between, or gender non-binary, so not fitting into one particular binary or the other. This here is Billy Porter showing us their gender expression. So this is a picture of Billy Porter, an actor out of America, and he's on the red carpet. Billy Porter is a gay male. He is not transgender. What you're seeing here is Billy Porter's gender expression and how he wants to show himself to the world. So here you might describe Billy as dressing more femme or in more feminine. And our gender expression can change many times throughout our lives, many times throughout one week or a day. And it's the way we show our gender to the world. Whereas gender identity is not something that you can see on the outside. Gender expression is. So just to kind of break it down a little bit, gender spectrum. This gives us the 4 different components of who we are and what makes up the people that we are. We have our gender identity, our gender expression, our biological sex, which refers to our biological body parts. And then there is who we are attracted to and who we love. And that's our sexual orientation. And there's a lot of different, you can see how there's one side of the plane and the other side of the plane. And if you were to plot yourself down there, it's highly unlikely you would have a very straight line as to where you fall. And it can be changing, again, throughout one's lives. Sometimes we feel we want to express ourselves in different ways, more feminine, more androgynous, more butch. And other times we feel like maybe we want to be frilly and pink. So, you know, I think this is a really nice illustration, and I can provide a download for it for anybody that's interested afterwards. So it's important to know that kids know their gender identity quite often as early as the age of 3. About 65% though of trans and questioning youth, as found in the Trans Pulse survey, they didn't tell anybody until they were about the age of 15 or 16 years old. And this is because of fear. Quite often it's that fear of rejection from your family, which happens sadly all too often, which we see children are rejected for identifying differently. It's fear of violence, assault, losing your friends, losing your sports that you're doing at school. It's very scary for a child to be acutely aware that their gender identity doesn't align with their sex as assigned at birth. And then look around at the messages that they're being delivered in classrooms and society, that it's not really okay to fit outside these boxes. And so that can become internalized. This is again from the Trans Pulse survey, and it was a survey done out of Ontario of trans youth between the ages of 14 and 25. 96% had heard that trans people aren't normal. 77% worried about growing old. 67% feared that they would die young. More than a quarter had been beaten, hit, and 32% had either had to move away as a family or perhaps move away from their family. And I can share with you that all of these statistics, except for the 32%, applied to my child before they were even 12 years old. And by the age of 14, the last stat also applied to them. So these are very real. And my child is just one example of thousands of children who are living across Canada, thousands of youth and teens, and also adults, co-workers, sisters, brothers, aunts, and uncles. In our school, they found that, that 43% of trans youth had been bullied in school. But what's also really interesting is that 40% of questioning youth, so those questioning their gender identity but have not actually come out as trans, were also bullied in school, compared to 16% of non-LGBTQ peers. When it came to skipping school because they felt unsafe even getting to school or being there, 35% of trans youth had skipped because of this, but even more, almost half, like 41% of questioning youth had also felt unsafe on their way to school or being in school, compared to only 8% of the non-LGBTQ peers. And this, hopefully you can see from the bottom, it's not too small. This was a very recent survey that was done in 2019. It's called the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance Data. So all of this can lead to a tremendous sense of hopelessness, of internalized self-hatred and a lack of belonging or a sense of family and a sense of community. And I think if we can all relate to how we felt in the last year with COVID and just that isolation and really realizing how important connection is in our lives, if we can for a moment think and consider what it must be like as a trans person, struggling with the idea of being able to live authentically, but also authentically and being safe and being accepted and being included for who they are. I think that we can all agree that that isolation and that feeling of hopelessness can be compounded. And this is what leads to the high suicide rates that you often hear about in the news, and that LGBT students were 2 to 3 times more likely to be suicidal. And the TransPulse survey showed that 77% had considered suicide, 50% of them because that they are trans. When we add on the intersectionality of religion and socioeconomic background, this can add layers upon layers for individuals. So if we take that into the workplace component, consider somebody who has graduated from university and they're applying at your business for work, and they have transitioned during university or after university. So perhaps they've changed their name and their pronouns. So what happens when their transcripts don't match? What happens when they can't provide their transcripts to you because the person who they're applying as the job is them, but their documentation does not align? How do they know that you're a safe employer and a safe space that they can be open and honest with you and share this information without repercussion, without the potential of not being hired because of their identity? And this is just showing the percentage of youth within the same study that were battling symptoms of depression. 61% of trans youth and questioning youth compared to almost 30% of non-LGBTQ peers, so 2 times as many. So I'd like to introduce you to Janet Mock. Janet Mock is having a conversation here with Oprah Winfrey on Soulful Sundays, and she is an advocate, an activist. She's an author. She was born in Hawaii under the name of Charles. She was assigned male at birth, and she is talking here about with Oprah about her book, Redefining Realness, and gives Oprah that sort of aha moment around what being trans really means.
I love how you say, I can't pinpoint to a pivotal aha moment. Grew taller and bolder despite the cues, rebuttals, and certainties of those around me who told me through a slightly furrowed brow or a shake of the head that even attempting to cross that void was wrong. I just thought that I was so moved by that, because I think of your 5-year-old self, and there's something in you that knows I can't do that, or somebody is going to be upset with me for doing that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And it's also interesting too in the sense of I fault the people were telling me that it's all
New. I love this next sentence too. When I look back at my childhood, I often say, I always knew I was a girl since the age of 3 or 4, a time when I began cataloging memories. No one, not my mother, my grandmother, my father, or my siblings, gave me any reason to believe I was anything other than my parents' firstborn son, my father's namesake. But it was my first conviction, the first thing I grew certain of as a young person, when I say, I always knew I was a girl with such certainty. Tell me what that felt like.
confusing. It was confusing because I didn't have language yet. I didn't know how to articulate what I was feeling in rebuttal to the people who are charged with my care. I came into the world supposedly knowing to trust my mother, knowing to trust my father. You know, as a young person, you don't have much agency or decision making.
That's right. Right.
And so you just go wherever people pick you up and take you and say that this is the way the world is. And something internal inside of me told me constantly that what they're saying is wrong. And so it creates this dissonance with who can you trust if you know that inside, as a 5-year-old, that this is how you know yourself to be.
So you knew that something was different, right?
Mhm.
Do you think they knew too?
Oh, yeah.
They all knew.
They all have their stories now.
Yeah.
Right? My mom talks about the first time when I put her earring backing in my ear and it fell down and I had to go into the surgeons and get it suctioned out. My father talks about the times in which he would watch me with a side eye, skeptical, wondering why I moved the way I did around the world, around our little community.
Because you were saying in the book, you describe it as your why you held your wrists that way.
Why I held my wrist, why I had a little swish in my hips. I had no idea why I was performing self in this way, why I was expressing my gender in this way. I didn't have language to understand that. I don't think my father did either. All he knew was that that's not how a boy is supposed to act. Not my son. I couldn't fault the people who were telling me that.
Okay, so that was Janet Mock, and it was interesting in that conversation too, where they really broke down gender identity and said, you know, your sexual orientation is who you love and who you might go to bed with at night, whereas your gender identity is who you go to bed as. And I hope that the audio worked okay for that and everyone was able to hear it clearly. So why do we learn about inclusion and 2S LGBTQ plus inclusion? We know because it's Canadian and it's kind, but also it is good business, and behavior that is not addressed becomes accepted behavior. It's safer for all, and bottom line is it is the law. And so we talk about in our training a little bit about the Human Rights Code and how in 2015, the Honorable Minister of Justice, Jody Wilson-Raybould, introduced Bill 16, which was a right to amend the Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code. It was passed in June of 2018 and explicitly makes gender discrimination and gender expression discrimination illegal acts under the Criminal Code and a protected right in the Human Rights Act. But what's really great is that you're all here because you have signed up for this free webinar, and that's really wonderful. But there are a lot of companies that are rolling out inclusion training, and not everybody is there on their own volition, and not everybody is there because they want to be there. And if we don't share the information of why it's important, why we're doing this intentionally to help people understand and give them factual information, sometimes it can go by the wayside. So I just want to share a little story about a friend of mine this week who works in Canada out of the province, and had walked in on a coworker who was doing some inclusion training. They had been off work and they were being reintroduced back into their work platform as a supervisor. And they were doing the inclusion course around the LGBTQ community. And they were totally unhappy. They were not happy to be doing that at all. They were muttering under their breath when the person walked in, my friend walked in, and had said, oh, this is just BS. This is like, why are we even here? And they were quite taken aback and said, what are you talking about? This is quite, this is pretty important. We deal with the public and we need to have this information and we need to be inclusive. Oh, they rolled their eyes. They were not buying it, and they were not, sipping from the cup, and they didn't want anything to do with that. So even though that they've ticked that HR box and this person has been retrained and out there, it's not necessarily that they've been open to taking it and really understand it intentionally. So there are different ways that inclusion training can be rolled out within companies. And what was really sad to know, that coworker who had considered the other person a friend was completely unaware that that person has a transgender person within their immediate family. And that's not something that they need to know, but they do need to know that how we communicate with people all around us and the assumptions we make can have very harmful repercussions. I want to just share one more quick video. This was, it won the Diversity and Inclusion Marketing Award in 2019. And then I thought I would just dive in a little bit about pronouns and the importance of names and gender markers.
Hey, Dad.
Hey. Carol, you remember my Gemma? And what's your name?
It's James.
James?
I think that's so good. Every name is a story, and every name is really important. And I know Patty shared about moving to putting your pronouns in your digital signature. And I'm just wondering if you wanted to reopen the text, you might have to retext the Cindy S054 to the same number. Perhaps you can let us know, is that going to pop up here, if you have your pronouns in your digital signature. Again, it's completely anonymous. There is no right or wrong answer. I'm just curious as to where we're at with that here. Wow, look at that. Lots of yeses. This is amazing. No, yeah, okay. Well, I still get tons of emails from people who do not. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the why behind it's a good thing to put your pronouns in your digital signature. So the big yes, I guess it's showing that there's probably more people with the yes than the no, which is really great. It is something that we see more businesses moving towards, and well, people feel like though they should do it. I wanted just to talk a little bit about the why, and why it can be important, even if you might feel like, oh, my pronouns are obvious. So we'll get into that now. A few more answers are still popping in. Okay. Okay, so just talking from a business point of view, we shared this visual during Trans Awareness Week last fall. So pronouns matter. From a demographic standpoint, 56% of US Gen Zers know someone who uses gender neutral pronouns, according to a new study. So 70% of Canadians choose where they work and shop based on visible and meaningful inclusion, regardless of how they identify. But as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of barriers to accessing work for trans and non-binary people. I mentioned the idea of transcripts with names not matching their pronouns, and 58% in a 2019 study showed that they did not match. And then if you move from one job, or perhaps have to leave because you are transitioning, and then you are entering the workforce with your authentic name and your pronouns, but your references don't match. How do you know if you can safely share that with your employer? What messages can you be sending potential employees, potential contractors that this is a safe space and we are not afraid to have these conversations and we are okay to work through them together? Again, gender marker not mentioning their ID. I can share with my own child. So they were born in Ireland, and unfortunately, you cannot change the birth certificate there. The name and the pronouns. So we were able to do everything here in Canada and update their gender marker and their pronouns on their passport and that, but we still have a birth certificate that basically it's somebody that doesn't exist anymore in Ireland, an Irish birth certificate. You have to go to court. You have to be living as your gender for until you're about the age, or minimum 3 years, and you have to be at least 16 years old. And so there's a lot of barriers there. And we're also doing really well here in Canada about breaking them down, but it's not an easy process for many people. And navigating that, if you don't have somebody supportive in your life, can be extremely challenging. So I think this is
What are
going to
pronouns?
start right away. I know that we're kind of getting close to time. This is a pretty short video that Isaac put together, and it's based around educating teachers, but it can easily translate for you into the workforce. And I just thought we'd dive a little bit into pronouns and why they are important. And so if we can just take a quick moment before I wrap up so we can listen to Isaac.
Pronouns are used to denote or refer to a person, place, or thing. Examples of pronouns are she and her, he and his, it and its, they, them, and much more. They also include words such as we, I, my, mine, anyone, and more. The best part about pronouns is that they do not correspond with our gender identity. You can choose what pronouns you feel best represent you. An example statement using pronouns is, I went to see Robin over the weekend, and we went to the movies with their partner, Jax. How many pronouns are in this sentence? There are 5 pronouns in this sentence. Note how the sentence uses the singular they in their partner Jax. From this sentence, however, we cannot assume that Robin's pronouns are they, them. Why are pronouns important? We use pronouns in our everyday life and often even without knowing it. Pronouns are an integral part of language and communication. Without pronouns, we would not be able to refer to ourselves and others without knowing each other's names. This is why asking what people's pronouns are is extremely important. Pronouns help make sentences more fluid. For instance, without pronouns, the sentence, she pet her dog would become Alex pet Alex's dog, which most English speakers can say sounds a little bit confusing. Why are names important? A lot of this might seem to be common sense, but similarly to pronouns, names do not correspond with our gender identity. While most of us were assigned a name at birth, perhaps there is some sort of backstory behind why our parents named us our name, some individuals decide to go by a nickname, such as Brad instead of Bradley, Sam instead of Samantha, or another name that they feel may best suit them. Anyone can change their name, legally or not, at any time in their life. When should I ask someone's name or pronoun? You should always ask or at least confirm what someone's names and pronouns are as soon as you meet someone for the first time, when you haven't spoken to each other for an extended period of time, and also when you can't remember their pronouns. It's better to ask than to guess. It never hurts to ask someone and be refreshed on what someone's names and pronouns are. It is important to never assume someone's pronouns, especially based off of their appearance, and it is perfectly normal to be nervous. The more you ask the question, the easier it becomes. Some easy examples on how to ask someone for their name or pronoun is to simply introduce yourself and just say, hi, my name is blank. I use blank pronouns. What is your name and pronouns? Or, sorry, I can't remember your name and pronouns. Can you remind me? What happens if I make a mistake with someone's name or pronouns? It's important to remember that nobody's perfect. You're going to make mistakes. Despite our best efforts, we sometimes misgender people. As a culture, we are in the habit of assuming people's pronouns based on appearance, unfortunately. But this is a habit that can be hard to break. When you misgender someone, correct yourself, apologize, and move on. You don't need to justify yourself or overly apologize. It's okay. Refusing to use someone's name or pronouns shows automatically that you do not respect them, especially if they've told you them before. It is best described in Julian Packett's editorial, Why They Matters. When a person ridicules or refuses to use someone's stated pronoun, this translates to the following: I don't respect you. I know better than you. You do not exist. You only exist in my terms. I tell you who you are. There's a very common misconception that using the singular they is incorrect. But the Oxford English Dictionary and Merriam-Webster Dictionary trace the pronoun actually back to the 1300s. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary, singular they, was also acknowledged as the word of the year in 2019. Whenever discussing pronouns, I always like to take a look at non-English languages and how they approach pronouns. So there are many languages that do not distinguish gender in their pronouns. So for instance, in English, we automatically assume if we hear he, him, that it's a man, or if we hear she, her, it's a woman. But for instance, he, she in Finnish is both one word, which is han. Similar in Chinese, the word for she, he, and it are all ta. These types of languages are what linguists call gender neutral. There are also some languages that have specific characters that are attached to nouns called morphemes that reference gender. For example, in French, every noun has a gender, masculine, le, or feminine, la. The chair you're sitting on, in French, it's feminine, la chaise. This is called grammatical gender, where every noun in a language has a corresponding gender associated to it. Not all languages, though, limit to just feminine and masculine. German and Russian, for instance, also have neutral, they, it, etc. in their grammatical gender. Whether you are a teacher, a professor, an employer, or more, be a model for your peers. In a classroom or professional setting, we might go around and ask everyone what their name is and pronouns are. Make sure to ask everyone. Even someone who appears to use binary pronouns such as she and her or he and his, or may have been using the same name for many years, may prefer something different now. Before you ask students to share, explain that you want to make sure you are referring to everybody by the correct name and pronoun, which you can assume based off appearance. Model this approach by sharing your name and your own pronoun. Be sure to reinforce that it is okay if folks choose not to share, or if they want to change their preferred name or pronoun at any time. In the download section below, I have provided a free, easy-to-use guide to make asking pronouns and names easy in a professional environment. Feel free to edit it and use it as you'd like. It was originally modeled for a classroom environment, but it can easily be changed around to accommodate a workplace environment. The form can be given on the first day to new students or employees, or even when someone new enters the environment. It makes it easy for peers to request and make changes. Use this form to give students more privacy. Ask every student to fill out a form because it will help you to get to know them better. And remember to keep this conversation going. Stress that this is a conversation that will continue throughout the year and that pronouns can change. By doing this, you are making the classroom a safe space for LGBTQ youth. It is important to remember some folks only want to use certain pronouns within certain environments where they feel safe and comfortable. You might just be that safe space for that person.
Okay.
What are pronouns?
Great. So hopefully everybody found that helpful and that it can easily translate into the workplace, how you communicate events and things like that, you know, as opposed to saying, you know, bring your wife or bring your husband. I think people have moved away from that to bring, you know, bring your partner and, you know, in schools or settings with younger people, instead of using boys and girls, there's lots of different ways to distinguish between people. And you can even create categories under colors or fauna, flora, things like that. And tone is really important. So when you're starting a board meeting, perhaps, and you're going to share your pronouns, make sure that the tone fits the intention. And, you know, a roll of the eyes or a slight laugh underneath, you know, it sends that message that this isn't really important to you and that you're just doing it because it's because you have to. And again, it boils down to being intentional and being authentic. That download is available for anybody who does sign up for one of our online courses, and we do have a special Chambers discount. I just wanted to also talk about quickly Simply Good Form. So the work that we do, a lot of it is volunteer based. We are socially focused, and all of your engagement does directly support the trans employment and access to skills building and mentorships within our communities. We look to potentially pair individuals within appropriate companies. Even when it comes to, say, resume building or interview skills building, if anybody ever wanted to reach out to us and we can help align you with that program, we would be really happy to. We also look at doing inclusion audits for companies, so we can look at your website, look at your policies, what's available right up front. So when people are looking at your company and thinking, hey, is this a place that I want to work? Is this a place where I would feel safe? We can help you with that, your policies and administration, and putting your inclusive intentions into action and going beyond diversity theater or inclusion theater. If you're interested in checking out, Isaac and I, we co-host a volunteer podcast. It's bi-weekly. It's called Hey Sis. And we look to just educate cisgender folks around issues that are affecting the trans community here in Nova Scotia and all across Canada. And or if you're doing something exciting in your workplace that is even, within Pride, but outside of Pride, what are you doing around particular days to help support your trans community and the non-binary community, then reach out and connect with us, because we're always looking for fun topics to talk to people and help break down the barriers and break down stigma. I'd like to end with this quote, which is a quote by Andrew Sullivan, who's a writer and an author out of New York City. And he said, it was in a TED Talk, and Andrew said, neutrality, which lies somewhere between despair and celebration, is actually the end game. And the minute I heard this quote, for me, it just spoke to us as cisgender people within our communities. And our neutrality is the end game for the 2S LGBTQ community. It is not enough to stand back and let people fight. We have to all do our part in creating safe spaces and welcoming spaces so that we can move beyond the stigma that exists and is still quite prevalent in our communities. So be intentional, join a growing number of professional game changers Canada-wide, and we look forward to working with you in the future. If you'd like to, I know we're going into a question and answer period right now. I will leave this open. It's, again, fully anonymous. If anybody wanted to give me some feedback or a testimonial, you can text that in. I'm hoping that I should just double check that it's activated, and then I'll come back and sign off to Patty and answer some questions. Well,
Okay. Wow. What great information, Cynthia. Whew, so much to digest here. This is fantastic. And as a boomer Gen Zer on the bubble, we are always learning, right? It's all about learning. So some key takeaways that I took from this morning was it's about language, right? Language is important. The words we choose are important. Wow, that's great. I do have a couple of questions that people have sent in ahead of time. And the first one is, what are some ways that we can show that we are true allies in our workplace?
Well, I definitely think when we talk about language, we also talk about communication. And sometimes we can feel fear around asking questions because we might fear that maybe I should already know this, and maybe I'm asking something that is going to show that I'm ignorant. And what I always tell people is to not be afraid. Asking that question is just showing your intention for growing. And people can tell when it's coming from an authentic place. But visibility is also super important. So quite often I'll put around my water bottle or on my desk space. Oh, you can't see it because of this background. I'll put a bracelet, and I'll wear that on my water bottle or my coffee cup. And sometimes people say, well, I'm not trans, so if I wear that, like, what, and I just think, for somebody who might be trans within your workspace, or if you're walking down that street and they're having really maybe a bad day and they see you carrying that coffee cup, that mug with a bracelet around it, instantly they can feel just a little bit safer and more connected. And I just think positive visibility is really important. So ask your employers, ask your spaces, like, what are we really doing? Or can we, put some visuals up in our lobby, in our spaces? Having those kinds of things up front is really important. And we do, through PFLAG Halifax, we have some really great posters. If anybody is interested in a free poster, you can email me. It's a really great one that really talks about trans youth and inclusion. And aside from that, again, I think it's looking at it's being intentional. So it's not having your policies buried so deeply that you have to respond to them when there's an incident that happens within your workspace. We see this happening all too often in schools, that people are being responsive to something, but they're not being proactive ahead of time and actually educating beyond the binary and talking about how, we can all exist authentically in many different ways. So I think it's about being proactive.
Great. It is. It's so, and just being open,
Yes.
right? Being open is so important. We have a question here in the chat box. I'm not sure if you can see it, or a comment. Jennifer says, our union says a harassment-free statement at the start of every meeting to promote a safe space for all attendees. We also allocate harassment officers to each meeting in case someone needs to reach out with a concern. That sounds like a pretty great policy. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, I think it's great. It's constantly, reminding people that you take, safe spaces and that seriously. You can also look at other things like, is there a gender neutral washroom in your space? Are you sharing your pronouns in your digital signature? I know one of my first presentations that I did, somebody had said, oh, I did that. I went away and I put my digital signature into my email or on my LinkedIn after my name. And somebody actually reached out to me and said, hey, I noticed this and I'm wondering why are you doing it? And they said it was just a great opportunity to explain to them what they had learned and that they wanted to do this as well to show that it's important and that, you should never assume somebody's pronouns. So it can start that conversation as well, which is really, really important. It's just about moving beyond our fear of actually talking about that not everybody fits into one of two boxes.
So true. So true. I'm just checking to see if there's any other Q&A and no other chat. So Cindy, we're getting pretty close to the end of our time. Any final thoughts or little tidbits of wisdom you'd like to share with us before we sign off?
Well, I'm really delighted with the turnout today. I'm amazed, I'm glad to see there's so many people interested in this topic because, as I have said, for me, it is personal, but it's personal for so many invisible parents that exist and work across Canada as well, who are raising and trying to support gender diverse or gender creative children, and being acutely aware of the stigma and the discrimination that that people are facing every single day, and trying to keep your children sheltered from actually being aware that, hey, if you had traveled down to the States last year, you could be, if you hurt yourself, doctors can actually not treat you because you're trans. Or, there's over 75 countries on this no-go zone because being trans is illegal and you will be murdered. And, things like this exist all the time. On January 11th in BC, a 13-year-old returned to school transgender and was viciously beaten on the ground by two girls. She was kicked in the head. She was punched repeatedly, and it was all caught on videotape by students standing around videoing and mocking and making bets, and nobody did anything. And it happens all the time and we don't hear about it. And it's easy to turn a blind eye when it's not you and it's not your family. But, I think we can all do better, people. And I always say, one last thought, creating safe space for more people doesn't take away space from yourself.
Ooh, I like that. I like that. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for an enlightening, just education is always good to learn and be more inclusive in our workplace, to creating a safer workplace and just a safer society where people can just be people. Thank you so much to everyone in our audience for joining us this morning on our business support series. Quick reminder that we do have another session tomorrow with Simplycast, which is an online marketing company that is providing free access to their platforms for all nonprofits in Halifax. So if you're interested in learning on how to communicate digitally, you can join us tomorrow with the Simplycast communication platform. And final note, this The session was recorded and it will be live on our YouTube channel later this afternoon, including all the slide decks. And I'm sure if you have any questions at all, the next few days, the next weeks, next months, Cynthia would be happy to engage in a conversation. Thank you all so much and have a great day.
Thank you.